this video I hope to go through some plating or DIY plating. I've seen a few videos online and I thought I might as well give it a go. So what is plating? Well, obviously a lot of the parts that came out of the Yamaha factory had a plating on them. It's not chrome, which is a different process, which is like on the fork tubes. But plating came out in like different colours depending on, I suppose, where you'd put the part on the bike. If it was going to be seen by anyone, then it would often be sort of like a chrome-like shiny silver finish, as in this axle bolt. But you can see over the years the poor old thing's just, the plating's quite thin and wears off, and it's just gone a sort of dull matte off colour. But you can still see a little bit on the top of the thread there. It's quite nice and shiny, like I say, chrome. But really, places like this nut is so worn off that it's actually rusting. The protective coating, which is what plating is, has disappeared. Now I could polish this up with a wire wheel and put auto sol on it and make it nice and shiny, but within about a couple of weeks it'll probably return to this off and start going rusty. And also plating would be a bit of fun as an experiment. The other thing is, people will say, well, why don't you just go out and buy new ones? The problem is, A, you can't get hold of a lot of these parts now, and B, they're very expensive. To ship them to Australia, you know, something like this nut I think costs €6.50, which I think is probably, I don't know, $12 for one nut. So it's $12. Then you've got postage on the top, which can be ridiculous sometimes, like $30. Anyway, you start doing things like washers and nuts, and you'll be paying out a few grand in bits and bobs. And also, like I say, you can't, some of these bits you can't get anymore. So where possible, we'll try and reuse as much as possible. The other colours you can get were this, well, on the original you'll see this is more of a yellowy gold, and the classic olive drab, which is sort of like a green. You see these on like quite chunky parts, like in case this steering stem lower clamp, it's all in this olive drab plating. Yeah, so that's plating in general. So let's see how we can do this at home. What we'll do here is, well, there's two plating methods. One is a super cheap one with using like almost household items, and then if it's sort of we get some result, positive result, then I might look at buying some chemicals from a proper plating, DIY plating online shop. So this simple method, it's a 3-step process. So step one, you have to prepare your parts, which is the time consuming bit. Basically you want to polish up the parts, get rid of all the rust, get it as smooth as possible. We'll do these test samples as we showed earlier. I'm going to clean these up as much as I can so they're bright and shiny. So here the parts are all wide brushed up, nice and shiny, look quite nice. The problem is, like I say, the plating's probably been stripped off now, and what was left, and within a couple of weeks they'll turn a grey and even start to rust. Next, we need to prepare a little bit of cleaning solution, and apparently the best method is using a diluted mix of water and acid. With all these operations we'll use demineralized water. It comes in various names and phrases, even what you use in irons and stuff. Basically it doesn't have any minerals in it. Tap water in certain areas can contain a lot of, I think, calcium and other stuff. Just naturally occurring, and those chemicals can interfere with our plating process, so you want it nice and pure. It doesn't have to be special. This costs cheap as chips, you know, 50 cents or whatever. So we need a 50-50 mix of acid, so we'll just use this glass jar. We don't need anything big because I'm doing very small test parts. And first of all, always add the water first. So we'll add this much in acid. Now it goes without saying, acid is dodgy stuff. It burns basically, so wear plastic gloves and eye protection and clothing, because it's, yeah, it will come into contact with your skin, it will burn it. A lot of countries, unfortunately, you can't even get it now without a a license, I think. I think in the UK you can't buy acid over the counter. Australia we can still get it because you put it in pools to change the pH level. It's got there saying 370 grams per litre of hydrochloric acid. I've got tons of stuff for some reason. And in this case, this other one I've got, it's saying similar amount, 280 litres, so it's about 30%, 33% or a third. So yeah, we'll just add the acid. So just a reminder, water first, then the acid, not the other way around. Now we just put a bit of copper wire around our parts, and we can no longer touch them after this process because we don't want them any grease or impurities getting on the metal. So we just put some copper wire on. We'll dip them into the acid for about just a minute, not too long, because you don't want to be burning off too much of the metal. You can see them fizzing away a bit. Like that. Look at real old fizzing away. I hope they don't dissolve. While that's doing that, we just put some water in here just to rinse them off when they're done. So that should be enough. Into the water. So they're in there. Give them a good rinse. And we'll leave them in there. Put the lid on the acid. It's the only dangerous part of the process really. From now on it's safe as houses, he says. So our parts are cleaned and polished up as much as we could. Copper wire on. Next process is to plate. So how do we plate? Well, we need a plating solution. And the way we do that is in a decent sized pot, plastic pot, pour in vinegar. I could only get this double strength vinegar. Now I don't know what that means. It's obviously double concentrate. When you do use vinegar, you just want plain, no colour, no seasoning like brown vinegar, plain old vinegar. The plainer the better. So we'll just fill up as much as you need in a pot to submerge the parts. There will do, I think. Then add some salt. The salt increases the conductivity for when we do the plating. So it's a bit of a guesstimate, but probably 2 tablespoons of table salt. Now we need a power source. It doesn't need to be much in the way of current. It just needs a DC power supply and as small a current as possible. Now if you look at most phone chargers, which everyone seems to be accumulating, in this case we've got the output on this is 5 volts and 1 amp or 1000 milliamps. So that's about right. So all we need to do is just chop off the end, strip back the outer cable, that should be long enough for the width of our container. And that's our power supply. Yeah, next up we need to now create the plating solution, and the way you do that is depending on how you're going to plate. There's 3 types of plating in general: copper plating, nickel plating and zinc. Now with zinc you can add a post treatment which can give us the different colors. So with the post treatment they call it a passivator solution, and you can get a much brighter silver, the golds, and in our case we also want drab olive or green. And I think, I could be wrong, but in general I think the zinc allows you for that passivator combination at the end. So what we need to do is to create our plating solution is to effectively get some of this zinc into the solution, and we do that by passing a voltage through the two terminals which will be connected to our power supply. So we'll make two strips of this, connect both ends to our power supply, and then pass the voltage through the vinegar solution. So what I'll need to do is just cut these strips of zinc, which you can get off eBay. I just bought this sheet. I think it was, I don't know, $6. I think the sheet or thin material is good to get the zinc into the solution to begin with. And then when we do plating for real, we'll use a thicker anode, which will be these. And that tend to last a bit longer. Whereas this thin sheet will rapidly, disintegrate because it's got a very large surface area. So okay, we'll cut up some small strips about the size of a small steel ruler. Okay, so that's our little circuit. So we put the anode and the cathode into the solution. Try and keep them as far apart as possible. In fact, what we'll do is we'll just put a fold over there, and then they can hang on the sides easily. So I've got those two. I've got the power supply, and I plugged it into the wall. And just as an experiment, we'll just check so I've connected the voltmeter in series to measure the current. So we're measuring in series on the positive side. So it's turned off at the moment. We'll turn it on. And we're getting about 200 milliamps. You can add a bit of salt, and that increases the conductivity a little bit. The more you add, obviously, the more conductivity. But once it starts settling in the bottom, that's too much salt. It's not dissolving. So you can see it's gone up a bit. The other thing to look at is you can see one side is beginning to bubble a bit. Yeah, you can see it fizzing away, bubbles coming. I think that indicates that that's the negative side, which makes sense because when we look at our power supply, that's the white wire and the other one's red for positive. So now what's happening is the zinc is effectively, I think, passing across the gap. My chemistry is pretty weak, but what's happening is the zinc is being deposited into the solution, which is what we want. So this is only a one-time process. Once this is finished, you probably won't need to do it again. And we'll have to leave this now for, I think, a couple of hours, just ticking away, and then that process is finished. There's no way of telling when it's finished, as in other processes like copper and nickel, you get a nice color in the solution. So I think copper is blue and nickel a nice green. So obviously when you get those nice colors, you know the process is working. For zinc though, there isn't a way to tell. I don't think you can go over the top. So if we leave this and come back and find this anode, I'm getting anode and cathodes muddled up, but if this anode disintegrates, that probably indicates obviously the zinc has gone into the solution. Anyway, we'll leave that and come back in a couple of hours. So now we've got our plating solution, which we left for running for about 2 hours. We disconnect the negative one, so that's the negative. We take our cleaned part and we want it to be suspended a fair way away from the other cathode, I think they call it, and we want it halfway up in the liquid. sort of like that. And then, as this is just an experiment, we'll just try and twist these two together, which will be a bit hard. So it's like that. I'll get you in close so you can see down in the bottom there. Alright, so I think we're good to start plating. We'll turn it on and see what happens. Okay, it's fizzing away. And we'll leave it for 45 minutes. Okay, that's 45 minutes. I had a look early on and it was already plating within about a minute. I think that might be too much of a violent action. Ideally you want it to fizz, but they say the trick is to tune it, the current, so there's no bubbles, and then you turn up the current until you start to see small bubbles come off. So looks a little bit full on. Anyway, let's turn off the power. You can see the bubbles stopped. And we take it out, and certainly got zinc on it. We'll give it a rinse in some water. Just disconnect this. Give it a good rinse. And we've only got vinegar on it, strong vinegar, and some salt. Oh, one other thing, when you finish plating, take everything out. You don't want to leave it in there. Because it will, they say it'll just eat away the electrodes. And just give it a wipe because you get this like sooty deposit. Just helps with the plating next time. And in fact, because this is quite thin, we'll use thicker rods because they'll last better. So now we've got this, let's zoom right in. It's definitely got plating on it. It's quite a rough finish. They say now you got to polish it up, so we'll do that. So this is the part just cleaned up, just with a dry rag. So now we'll do a bit of polishing. I've just got this metal polish from Auto Store. Yeah, so we'll just give that a shake. And put a smidge of polish on, not much. And we just give it a good clean. Well, it certainly comes up quite nice actually. It's hard to say if the plating, how thick the plating is, but it certainly looks like it's got that sort of zinky colour to it. I think it works quite well. What I'll do now is I'll do some more test pieces and see how it goes. We're going to hang a couple of parts this time, so I'm going to switch out the piece of wood to hang the objects from with some old copper tubing I've got lying around. A bit of wire wool is always good to clean up copper, just nice and shiny, and then we'll have a much better contact. So same as before, we'll hooked it up, turn it on, and they're both fizzing away. Yeah, we can put in line a resistor or something like that to just cut down the amount of amps going through. Get one from a hobby shop, maybe a variable little potentiometer, and we can play around with the current just by increasing or lowering the resistance. So this is the final setup where I'm using the two cathodes connected to the positive side, and I'm using the zinc bar, which is thicker than the zinc strips. So I've got the two connected to the positive, and then I just hang the part that I want to plate in the middle on the copper bar. One other tip I've found is that you need to have the temperature of the bath above, I think, 20 degrees, ideally like 25 degrees up to 30 degrees. I was doing it this yesterday, and it's quite cold here. It was only about 15 degrees. So this water was like, I say, 15 degrees. And I wasn't getting any reaction, which was a bit strange until I did a bit of research. So yeah, you've got to keep it quite warm. Obviously, if the ambient air temperature is 25, you're all good. Or if you're doing it in the house, it should be fine. But if you do it in a cold shed, it probably won't work. A workaround is to put it on a little stove and just let it on a very, very low heat. Keep it warm, but obviously with plastic, you can't put it on a direct heat. What I did was just wrap it up in an old jumper. And I've actually got from beer making a sort of a warming, I don't know what they call them, but it keeps your beer warm while it's fermenting. So it's quite a nice low temperature, like electric blanket, I suppose, yeah. That made a big difference, and then it started plating again. So at the moment this is at about 23, 25 degrees. Yeah. So yeah, that's a tip. Just you've got to keep it warm, otherwise it won't work. Another thing, at the end of the day, or when you do a bit of plating, if you're going to use this thing, you've got to clean the cathode. I always forget what it is. You can see it gets a build up over time, and you can just wire brush that off. It makes them more effective, and also don't leave them in the bath. So once you finish, you've got to take them out, give them a clean, and keep them dry. So I've had this now for a few days. This is the washer that we cleaned up and zinced. When it came out, like, it was pretty rough looking grey. Polished it up, and it works very well. I mean, you may laugh, you might just as well buy a washer at that size that's already zinc plated. But like I say, it's really, some of the bits I want to do are very expensive to replace, and they're just lacking this finish. So it's probably good experiment. And if you are in a bit of a tight squeeze and you've got some small piece, I think that's the key thing, some small pieces that you want to have a go at plating, definitely worth doing this. But once you start getting onto slightly thicker, bigger pieces, more complicated ones, this looks on the face of it to come up all right, but it's a bit blotchy. And I think I've left this for a day, and you can see there's rust coming back pretty fast, worse than when we started originally, I think, although it was covered in oil. And you can see down in the threads. So perhaps the critical bit is if you have a small pump, a submersible pump, to let the fluid flow through the bath, because it's all stationary and you get a lot of shadows happening, I think. So if you're a little old aquarium bubbler or whatever they call them, or some sort of stirrer, it keeps I think the fluid moving around, and you don't get these shadow spots, which is a shame. So because generally this is not too bad, it's come out quite well. Also, with the power supply, I've only got a phone charger. It's either on or off. It's very difficult to control the current. This one, what happened here is it really built up. You can see a very dense coating of zinc, and it's very rough. It's almost like sandpaper, and it took me a while to buff that back. I mean, it comes up beautifully shiny, and it's probably got a very thick coating. But if you look quite closely, it's got I wouldn't say pitting, I think it's it's got a build up of the actual zinc. I think they call it, there's a name for it, I'll have to look it up, but some sort of like, it's almost like a fern tree, and they get these little growths coming out, and it rubs off, but that probably needs a lot more buffing to get that super smooth. Yeah, so I think as an experiment, it's a bit of fun and it's certainly doable. But when we get onto bigger pieces, and I did a test here, in fact, we'll do a test and I'll show you perhaps, if it's really good enough or not. So what it is, I've just cut this piece of old angle iron up into 3 pieces. This is the raw piece of stock. I put the 0 on there just to indicate, but it's pretty clear this is not plated. I wire wheeled this up, gave it a good clean, dropped it in the acid and plated it. Took a long time to plate because I think the phone charger was struggling and I was getting shadows because of the problem with the fluid not running around, I think. So in the middle here, because it was hanging this way up, in the middle here, it didn't look like it had taken very well, but the back sides, that's come up really well. Again, it sort of comes out a bit of a grey colour. This needs a bit of buffing. It wasn't as bad as this, but I think because of the size, perhaps the surface area is much, much bigger. You probably need more current. So I have difficulty balancing the current loads. It's just 1 amp and nothing else. So it's too much for that and not enough for that. So I think, given the results, I'm going to invest and buy a little plating kit. You can get them online. There's one down the road. I say down the road. There's a place in Newcastle. I think it's called Jane Kits or something. So I might order their medium-sized one, and it comes with a proper power supply. Yeah, so something that I think their power supply is about 4 amps. My phone charger is only 1 amp, and I can't control it. It's either on or off.